Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given to you by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jelon Johnson. My guest today is Tammy Sollenberger. Tammy is a psychotherapist, an author, and an internal family systems certified supervisor. She holds a Master of Arts in Marriage and Family Counseling, and she developed a Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, DBT, skills group program while she worked with adults who struggle with mental illness as a community support therapist. So, Tammy, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
If you would, just so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, can you tell a little bit about yourself and your story and your journey and how you got to who and where you are today?
Sure. Well, I live in New Hampshire. We were just talking about skiing. I have a 12-year-old son. He just turned 12, and we like skiing, but we're like really good on the greens. We just hang out on the greens. That's kind of our vibe. I am a therapist, and I was a therapist for a few years before I discovered IFS. And when I discovered IFS, it really changed everything about my life. It changed the way I see people, the world, myself. It changed my life personally and professionally. And so I love talking about it. I love telling people about it. That's why I have a podcast, because I just feel like it is stuff we all need to know. And I want to get it out of the therapy room, just like what you're doing, right? We want to get these concepts and these ideas out of the therapy room and accessible to everybody, not just people who have access to therapy or can afford therapy. And so I have a podcast and I wrote a book just for just the average person who just, needs a little more support and guidance.
Perfect. That's beautiful. And I love the way you said you want to get the information out to just the average person. So it's not just, something that you can talk about in a therapy session. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I think that's what's important. I think that's what I've always thought is like, it's not, it's almost like a class I wish that we could teach in elementary school and in middle school and in high school, where we learn about how we work on the inside and how other people work on the inside and how we have to treat ourselves on the inside. And, and if we learned that early, then, we would, so many of us might not have to go to therapy if we learned that early.
It's so true. So true. So as we were discussing IFS, and you're well aware of my love affair with IFS. So what I wanted to do was to talk a little bit about internal family systems, that therapy modality, and give you an opportunity to kind of dive into it a little bit more and explain it. So if you could you first of all tell us, what is IFS?
Yeah, so internal family systems, or IFS, is it really is a different way. It's a type of therapy. So people might know like cognitive behavioral therapy is a type of therapy, or EMDR is a type of therapy. So IFS is a type of therapy, but we think that it's much more than that. It really is a different way of seeing the world and ourselves and personality. So what IFS tells us, so it is a therapy modality. It's a way to do therapy. Definitely. But also it tells us about personality. So what IFS tells us about personality is that we all have parts. I have a part that is, I use food a lot as an example. So I have a part that wants to eat the chocolate chip cookies, and I have a part that says, eat the kale. I have a part that says, get up early. Let's get up early and go for a run. I have another part that says, oh, let's please just stay in bed. So I have all these different parts. We all do. I have a part that loves my partner and loves being with him and enjoys him. I have another part that's like, says, this isn't going to work out. And oh my gosh, this is like, you need to end it because it's too stressful. And so I have these, we have all these parts. We have parts, right? Sort of about all the things I just named. So we have all these different parts of us. And so IFS says we have all these different parts, and it's a natural state of our mind to be multiple. We all have these parts, but we also have what's called a self, and the self is separate from the parts. It's who we are It's our essence, it's our spirit, it's our soul, it's who we all were meant to be. And we think about self, we think about qualities like calm, connected, created, clear-minded, and curious. And so healing happens when self gets in relationship to our parts. And so when I, as self, as myself, my authentic self, when I hear from my part that says, hey, I want to eat all the chocolate chip cookies, and I'm like, hey, I get that. Chocolate chip cookies make us happy and they taste good. And then I hear from the part that says, hey, I want kale. And then I can say from myself, I totally get that, right? First of all, kale isn't that bad, but we want to feel good in our body and we want to be healthy. And so I get that you also are trying to make us feel good. And so when I get some space between me and these two parts of me, I realize they both just really want me to feel good. And so I can let them know, hey, I get that you have a positive intention for me. All parts have a positive intention. And so I can say, I get that you're trying to have a positive intention for me. Tell me more. Tell me more about where you got this idea that that's what would make me feel good. Tell me more about your story. And then the idea then is there's self, and then there are these parts, and then we have two different type of parts. We have three different type of parts, actually. We have protectors, and we have parts that need to be protected. So we have protectors who really work to help us in our lives. We have one type of protectors called a manager. Managers kind of go in front of us. They are preemptive. They organize our lives. They make lists. They work really hard to make sure that we feel safe. And then we have parts that are called firefighters. Anytime we don't feel safe, they come up to make sure anytime we feel that fire, they come in to make sure that fire goes out. And so we have a third type of part, which is called an exile. And those are the ones that need to be protected. And so we have protectors, and then we have the ones that need to be protected. So the idea too is that if an exile, so a feeling of shame or a feeling of like today with my power went out again, this week has gone out twice. My power went out again. My computer wouldn't start. So this part of me is like, I feel this shame, and I hear I'm not allowed to make a mistake. I'm not allowed to make a mistake. And so that is this deep wounded part of me that just really feels embarrassed and shame and I'm no good and something's wrong with me and I'm not going to be loved and I'm not going to be liked. And some of that I'm not aware of, but I feel in my body. Like when I make a mistake, this exile like in my belly gets really triggered. And so what happens is I have managers in my life that make sure that exile never gets triggered. Like the manager says, you need to be perfect. You need to be really good. You need to schedule your life and make your life look a certain way so that you never, ever, ever make a mistake. So you're going to say yes to these things, no to these things. You might not try these things, all of that so that you never feel like you make a mistake. That makes sense, right? So these parts make sure I never make a mistake. But guess what? Electricity goes out and your computer takes 20 minutes to start. So mistakes happen. So that exile does get triggered. And so when that exile gets triggered, the firefighter comes in to say, uh-oh, I've made a mistake. That exile energy got triggered. I've made a mistake. I feel the shame. That's the fire. The firefighter comes in to say, okay, let's eat the cookies. Let's cancel everything. Let's go to bed. Let's drink. Let's cut. Let's look at porn. Let's yell at everybody. Let's do something to make sure that we don't feel that mistake feeling. So that's kind of what happens is we've got the managers, firefighters. Think of it as sort of an upside down triangle. Managers, firefighters, and they're working their butts off to protect that exile. And then I and myself, so I'm sitting in front of my computer as it's taking forever to warm up. And so I just had my eyes shut and I just was feeling that feeling of mistake making that I'm so familiar with, the part that says, you're not allowed to make a mistake. I can't believe this is happening right now. And I can feel that. I can feel the warmth and the shaky. And then I feel a part that feels angry about that. And so I'm just listening and I am just being with all those parts and all those feelings in my body and sensations and words. There's space between me and them. I'm just listening to them and I'm saying, just sit in this chair and wait for this computer to come on. And while you're waiting, I'm right here and I'm listening. I'm right here and I'm listening. And so that's kind of how, that's what IFS is. It's those parts and self And there's us listening and being with those parts.
That was incredible. Um, Ironically, there's a part of me that is so excited that I was able to delve into IFS because it just enabled me to be on the other side of your explanation of it. And I was so just blown away by the way you explained it because it made so much sense. And although it's intricate and it's difficult to cognitively get a grasp on if you don't know what therapy is or what a modality is or that you have an internal family system, you just made it very relatable, very, very relatable. So thank you for your explanation and for making it personal too, because for me, like I explained to you earlier, for me to share space with someone like you who's a therapist, and not only a therapist but an IFS therapist, and someone I look up to so much, to have you give a personal experience about how you're feeling and how you're able to connect the dots because of this modality. It is so relatable, and it makes me feel seen and heard in a lot of ways. A lot of parts are seen and heard.
I love that. Excuse me. I love that. And I think that's, um, that's the secret, is that when we see so what happens on the outside, the external, like what you're saying is like me sharing that helps your parts feel seen and heard. So that happens on the outside of us. And so that's what we're saying is internal. That happens on the inside too. So when my parts feel seen and heard by me, they soften, they relax. And so I want listeners to think about, like, see if they can think about a part of them that they don't like. Right? Whether it's the part that, who makes mistakes, or their perfectionist part, or a part that does a behavior that they don't like, whether it's eating too much or drinking too much, or looking at porn or cutting themselves or drinking, whatever it is, being late all the time. It doesn't have to be just something that they don't like about themselves. And then imagine that they just got curious about that thing inside of them that they don't like. Like, what if they just got a little bit curious about that and then began to see and hear from that part of them? That makes a huge difference in ourselves and in how we feel and how our day goes and our mood, when I can see and hear from the part of me that's doing something that maybe I don't like. And so the seeing and the hearing, we call that the witnessing. When we and ourselves can witness and listen and understand, even if I don't agree, right? Like the part of me that eats all the cookies, that part feels very strongly about doing that's the behavior that's going to help me, and has a lot of strong opinions about that. I don't agree with that, but I can understand why that part feels that way. And so I can listen and hear and be with that part. And sort of there's that idea, right? I can be with that part without necessarily agreeing or arguing, right? I'm just holding space and just listening to this part of me. That's not what we normally do, right? We normally argue and we get frustrated, and yeah, but that is just two parts fighting back and forth. And that's how we normally, that's normally what we think of, is sort of, I have these two parts and they just fight back and forth. And that's actually not what's just that is happening. But then when we think about you and yourself, you can listen and have those two parts almost kind of, I always think of them, about them turning, and instead of looking at each other, have them turn and look at you and tell you what's going on, so then they feel seen and heard by you.
I think that the inner work that it takes to get to a point to realize that you are not the things that you do, or you are not the behaviors that your parts, when they're in control, influence you to do, is so difficult, right? Because when I learned that I could become unenmeshed from a part, it was like I had just learned a cheat code in life. Like, okay, I understand why I'm feeling this way, but just because I'm feeling this way doesn't mean I have to do something to soothe the behavior. I can feel it, I can recognize it, and then I can say, okay, I know why this is happening. And it may be happening because 20 years ago, there was a major incident that happened, and now my body is trying to protect me from ever feeling that again. And I remember the very first time that I came to that realization, and I just stopped and I was like, wow, I don't have to continue doing what I normally do when I feel this. And I think to me, that was the power of IFS. And then I also remembered a time when what IFS means, internal family system, I got it. I was like, oh, it's all the different parts inside of me that make up my family system internally. And then from there, like I told you earlier, like I've just been flying with this, blowing the roof off. Like every day, it feels like I'm just getting better and better and better at being authentic and being myself without having to feel any shame or regret or anything. I'm just comfortable learning to be me, you know, and I attribute it to IFS. I love this freaking modality so much.
Yeah. Well, it is. We talked about having a love affair, right? It is wonderful to have a love affair with this model, and I totally get that, having a love affair with it, because what happens is, right, 20 years ago, something happened in your life, and then a part of you says, okay, we don't ever want that to happen again. So we need to be really protective of whatever that wound is. And so we're going to do a thing or think a thing or have a belief in order to protect you. And then here's the family part. Then you have all kinds of parts around that part. Parts that don't like it, parts that are mad at it, parts that agree with it, parts that say it's the only way we can live. And then so they all kind of relate to each other. And then what happens is that gets stuck because our system thinks that 20 years ago is still now, and it thinks it still has to do that because being safe will always win out. Like, should I be happy or safe? Safe. Safe is going to win. Happy is not going to win. Safe is going to win. And so that protective system gets stuck. And the family that's around it gets stuck in it. And so what I'm hearing you say is you and yourself, you're going back and you're mapping and getting to know who is in that system of parts that happened 20 years ago. You know, what happened, what's being protected, who's protecting, and you're letting them know, hey guys, we don't need to do that anymore. Thank you for your help. Thank you for all you've done for me, but we don't need to do that anymore. Not that those parts need to go away, but they maybe could do something different for you, or they could have a different job or a different role. But it also helps when you have that curiosity and that compassion and that like, hey guys, we don't need to do that anymore. Let's talk about that. And also helps us feel less complicated because it quiets all those busy, loud parts around the thing that happened 20 years ago, right? There's the thing that happened 20 years ago, and then the protector that's there, and then all the parts, sort of like the cousins that are around it, that have an opinion about it. So it quiets all those cousins that are so loud, that makes us feel like there's so many voices inside of my head. And part of that is because there's sort of like, there's all the cousins that are yelling about it, instead of being like, okay, wait a minute, let me talk to the original part that was protecting me. Let me have a relationship with that part. And then we can soften that and see where we can go from there.
Exactly. I I realized that in order for me to get to my exile parts, which were the initial wounds, I had to get the protectors to trust me first. Which, just being able to describe that, it sounds so weird, right? Because when I try and have a conversation with somebody, like, they may not get it. So to be able to have this conversation with you is so validating, because I understand and you understand, because this is what you do, right? So I I realized that my protector parts had to trust me, and then once I gained their trust, they kind of step out of the way and let me get to the exile. And then once I'm at the exile, which is the initial wound, I have to kind of relive the event that happened, so that that exile will then understand that he can trust me too, because I know what the main issue was. And then once that happens, like, we all heal together. It's
Yeah, it's
incredible.
beautiful.
It is
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
So,
Well, one thing that is different about IFS is that, you don't, and this is what sometimes people can feel really scared of therapy, is that you don't really relive it. It's different when you're like, I'm being with the part of me who lived it. So if it's a 5-year-old little boy, I'm imagining there's a 5-year-old little boy, and then I, in my calmness and clarity and compassion, I'm standing right next to him. I'm not overwhelmed by him. I'm not triggered by him. I am being with him. And he's telling me about his pain. He's telling me about what happened. And I am being right there with him. And then I'm being what he needed. I'm giving him a hug. I'm telling him the truth about himself. And that is the most healing experience we can have. And it's when you're in it, it is not overwhelming. It's a beautiful experience.
I agree 100%. 100%. Okay, so who's driving the bus, right? Um, I love the illustrative way that you guys put that together. And what I wanted to do was see if you could kind of explain the the narrative behind who's driving the bus and what it all means.
Yeah. So, who's driving the bus is the idea that, like, a part of us, well, let me say that it's not like parts are bad and self is good. Sometimes we have that, right? Like, I need to be in self all the time or be in self energy all the time. And self has to be driving the bus and parts can't be driving the bus. That's not true. Parts aren't bad, which we know that. But someone's always driving the bus. Right? Like right now, the part of me that's driving the bus is the part that's talking and feeling in my body. It's sort of who I am in this moment, like who I am. And I'm kind of in my head a little bit. I'm thinking, I've got a little bit of a therapist hat on, a little bit of intellect. Like that's the part that's really driving my bus. There's a little bit of self energy here. So it's not all or nothing. We teach it as all or nothing because it helps understand it. Otherwise it's very confusing. It's confusing anyways sometimes, but so the idea is that whoever is almost like, not to sound really weird, but kind of whoever is kind of embodying you, like whoever's kind of in your body, that sounds really weird, or whoever you're kind of seeing through, that's the part that's driving the bus. Sort of who's talking, thinking, moving right now, right? So the part of me that's driving the bus right now is a little therapist, a little intellect, a little analyzing, and I can feel that in my body. I feel pretty grounded in my chair. My feet are on the floor, but all my energy is in my head right now. Like I can feel it here. There's a little bit of tension in between my brows. There's a lot happening in my head. And that's who's driving the bus, is this amazing, smart part that's driving the bus. Now, who was driving the bus an hour ago when I didn't have electricity? Not this part, right? The part of me I could feel it. I was anxious. There's a part of me that was anxious. It was in my chest. My heart was racing. I didn't know what to do because the Wi-Fi goes down. And so I didn't know. So that's who was driving the bus. And that is very different than who's driving the bus right now. And it'll be very different than who's driving the bus, when I pick up my son from school today. That will be a different part driving the bus. It doesn't necessarily mean that these parts are burdened, right? That are like sort of that need work. There's also parts that just sort of manage our lives. Like they're just sort of managing our lives and doing the thing, parenting, working, explaining, teaching. Yeah, so that's kind of the idea, and it's kind of fun to just to have this idea of like, okay, who's driving the bus right now, and then how do I feel towards that part that's driving the bus. Right now, I'm like, hey, she's got it. She's explaining things. I feel pretty calm, lots of energy in my head. That feels okay right now. So she's got it. She's driving the bus. That's fine.
Nice. So I wanted to I wish I was able to show like the graphic that you guys did to show I guess it's whatever part is activated is the part that's driving the bus. And then the feeling behind what that part is trying to suppress would be in the back of the bus. So one example was, okay, so who's driving the bus? I need to maintain control equates to I am powerless. Can you explain that?
Yeah, yeah. I think you're talking about the Are you talking about the Enneagram and IFS graphics that were up?
Hmm.
I think those are the Enneagram graphics. Yeah, those are so fun. Yeah, so the idea is often the parts that are driving a bus is a protector, right? So the protector is I need to maintain control. So if I need to maintain control, and what was it the other? I'm powerless. Okay. So that's the protector. I need to maintain control. And so then the idea is think of it as like the protector is working really hard to maintain control, and however that makes sense for you, in order to keep the feelings, the beliefs, the sensation of powerlessness in the back of the bus. So the more I maintain control in the front of the bus, the less I have to feel and experience what's happening in the back of the bus. So the more I have my protector is working hard to maintain control. I don't feel the exile who experiences powerlessness. So it's really like, here's my protective system. So it could be a manager or a firefighter, right? I work hard to maintain control so the exile doesn't get triggered, the feelings and sensations of powerlessness. If I end up feeling powerless, because I will, because I'm human and I can't control everything, and I feel powerless, then the firefighter jumps in and maintains control in a way that felt like when we're little. How did we have to maintain control when we're little? Like I remember someone was telling me that one of the things they did when they were little was they would really organize like all their toys by like color and shape, and like very organizing of the toys and the books, because this is the only thing that they had, right? They couldn't go for a drive, they couldn't listen to music, like they couldn't go to yoga or talk to a friend. We do whatever we can do when we're little when that gets triggered. So if I'm powerless, then I'm going to control my environment. So there's that part that's going to control the environment when I feel powerless.
Mm. Well, and I think that for people who grew up in environments where there was dysfunction, or maybe caregivers weren't as emotionally in tune with them as they should have been, control can a lot of times equate to power, and not having power or feeling powerless can make us feel like we're inadequate or like there's something wrong with us. So it makes a lot of sense how that part could come in to make sure that feeling is always exiled, you know? So that was a great explanation of that.
Totally. Yeah, and I think too, when we're little, who has control? The adults. They have control, they have the power. And so if they aren't safe, if they aren't taking care of us, if we don't feel, we don't feel loved, or we don't feel safe, then our parts will do what they need to do in order to feel safe. And so the idea too, when we talk about like, I just said like your 5-year-old, the idea then is how we heal that is I self go to that part that's driving, that protector, make friends with them. I like, and so that part gets to trust me. And that's a hard part sometimes, to trust me, right? Because they don't want to give up that power and control to self. So I have to really feel self's energy, feel self's love, experience self. And then self can then go to the little one in the back, because that's a younger version of you who's feeling, because of course you're a kid. Kids feel powerless. Kids feel out of control. And so we let them know, of course you do, honey. And so when I can be with those that sweet little girl part, or you can be with your sweet little boy parts, then they feel that they don't need that we're in control, but in such a loving way that feeling powerless to them is going to feel safer, because they can feel powerless with us in a way that feels really safe. Of course they feel powerless, they're children, but they can do that. And if I'm here with them, that feels safer. You can feel powerless as a child and feel safe.
That makes a lot of sense. A lot of
Okay,
sense.
good.
And I
Because I
think
was
that,
like, does that make sense? Okay, good.
yeah, it does. It does. Because as a child, you're pretty much always powerless. But safety in powerlessness is different than powerlessness with no safety. So I think where self comes in is to go and console that part and let them know, listen, you don't have to have the power. I can have the power, and I'm going to make sure you're safe.
Yeah.
And that's where the healing is.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yes.
Okay, one more of the who's driving the bus concept, right? So, who's driving the bus? I need to be successful equates to I am worthless.
Yeah. Yeah. So same idea, right? The part that's driving the bus that works hard to make sure we're successful. And that's going to be, and I want listeners to think about like, what does success mean to you, right? It means something different to all of us. And so the parts of us that say this equals success, a part of me is like, never making a mistake equals success, right? Like I'm successful if I never make a mistake. And so, those parts, I'm almost thinking of it as like, again, they kind of go out in front of us. They work their butts off to make sure that we're successful. So we never feel the feeling that's in the back of the bus. We never feel the worthlessness. And so then, it's sort of like an efforting, like parts have a lot of efforting energy and like they're going to try a trying energy. So trying to be successful, efforting at being successful, whatever that looks like, in order to keep the exiled younger parts of us from feeling that worthlessness. And so the thing that's kind of ironic about that, and I think this is true for all of our parts, is I'm never successful enough. You and I just talked about this. I'm never successful enough to feel worthy, right? I never get enough compliments to feel worthy. I never get invited to do. I mean, you're invited to do some really cool things happening in your life, but it's almost like the worthlessness part of you that's feeling that in the back of the bus is almost cut off from what's happening on the front of the bus. So the front of the bus is like, I got success all over the place, but that part in the back of the bus doesn't feel it at all. And won't feel it really. Does that make sense? And won't feel it until self has to go back. Self has to start with the driver, friend the driver, get the driver to trust them, not in some weird way, but sort of like have a relationship with the driver, and then go to the back of the bus and hang out with that worthlessness part, the part that believes and feels and really experiences him or herself as being worthless. Wow. And then when self comes in and can be with that part, then that part can heal.
That was so deep. Wow. That was, don't ask if that was a good explanation, because it was. That was great. It's taken me a minute to process that, because it's true that we could have so many things going on, so many successes, and they could feel just empty. And it's because the part that doesn't feel worthy has never had an opportunity to come and join the party. Wow.
Yeah, mind blown. I know. Well, and it helps us understand. This is another reason why, we have a love affair with IFS. It helps us understand why, right? Like I can write a book and have a podcast, and you can have a podcast, and you can be invited to speak. And yet I still feel worthlessness. I still feel unworthy. Why you get a compliment and you're like, that doesn't even, I'm not even hearing what you're saying, right? You're like, so that really explains, because otherwise we're like, what's wrong with us? We're crazy. I can't understand. Like, so then I'm just going to try harder to be more successful. Maybe one day I'll feel worthy. No, actually, I'm just going to continue in this problem, this dynamic of working hard to be successful. So this is why we say this a lot, is IFS explains everything. And it really does. It explains why that sweet little part is not feeling worthy, and I can work my butt off, and and I'm still just chasing the next thing.
Right, because you never went back and got what needed to be tended to. Wow.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, so one of your posts said, my behaviors may look disorganized and dysfunctional on the outside, but they made sense on the inside, considering my brilliant parts were working hard to protect me. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So if people want to think about like something that they do, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but like something that they do that afterwards they're like, that doesn't make any sense why I did that, right? Whether it was in a relationship or sort of, it's kind of like I have a desire to do something, right? I have a desire to get up early and, start my day early and have a good morning routine. But then I end up staying in bed. I end up canceling things, and then I feel terrible about myself. And then I stay in bed till, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so that it makes no sense, right? It makes no sense. It feels dysfunctional, toxic. What's wrong with me? I must be crazy, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So if we think about that in terms of parts, what I might be curious about is, okay, there's a part of me that really wants to have a good morning routine. Can I get to know that part of me who might believe, or maybe even heard from our family, right? Like, start the morning off right, blah, 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 blah. Get up with the sun, whatever. So I want to really listen to the part of me that really believes have a good morning routine. And this is why, and this is what it means about me if I have a good morning routine. This is what it says about me. So I want to get to know that part of me about this morning routine. And then I want to get to know the part of me who canceled things and stayed in bed till 3. I want to get to know that part. Because probably what that part is going to say is, this guy over here, this morning routine baloney is driving me crazy, and I'm exhausted, and I can't have this part anymore because it's driving me crazy. And so I'm just like, forget you. I'm staying in bed. And so I'm like, oh, okay. That actually makes sense because you want me to rest. You want me to take care of myself. And with morning routine over here, that's not going to happen because we know that morning routine is actually not just morning routine. Morning routine is all day long, hustle all day long. So this one wants me to hustle all day long. And this one's like, I'm done with the hustling. Okay, I get it, right? You want me to hustle. You want me to rest. That makes a lot of sense. Both of you are extreme, right? You want me to hustle at a 20, right? Like 20, and you want me to rest at a 20. We don't need to sleep till 3. And we also don't need to go for a 10-mile run at 5 o'clock in the morning, right? Neither one of those things need to happen. And so I can listen to both of those parts and I can be like, oh, okay. There, we call them polarized, right? They're polarized with each other and they keep kind of pulling. Like, the more you want to rest, the more I tell you have to hustle. And the more you hustle, the more I have to tell you have to rest. And they're like in a fight. Okay. All right. So we're not going to fight because that's not helping anything. It actually makes us feel crazy. And so we're not going to do that. I'm here. I'm going to listen and I'm going to help to kind of negotiate. And then I'm going to decide. I'm the natural leader. I'm the parent. And I'm going to say, all right, I hear you both. And then let's see if I can make a decision about our schedule or sort of what we're doing.
I'm so glad I asked that question because your explanation was so on point and so relatable. Like, it makes so much sense, especially the part that, wants to stay in bed till 3. And then the part that's, in conflict with that, who says, wake up at 5, be productive, do this and do that, and do this and do that. So yeah, that was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The One Inside is the title of your book, right? Can you talk about your book a little bit?
Sure. So, my book is a 30-day self-guided journey just to help you get to know your system. And so what I have found is that IFS is very simple and very complex. And so, you and I know it, so we can talk about it. But for people that don't know it, they might be like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. Like, exactly. It's so confusing. And so I really wanted a book that just really, like, I feel like it's kind of dumbed it down for the rest of us. Like, because sometimes I'm like, I'll read stuff and I'm like, that's great, but I don't understand what you're saying. Like, I need it to be dumbed down a little bit for me. And so I mean that in all talking about even myself, I'm like, that's fantastic. And you're really smart, but like, make it make sense for the rest of us. And so I felt like I really tried, and hopefully I was successful to make IFS make sense to the rest of us because I want it to be simple. So it's 1 word a day. So it's 30 days, 1 word a day. And it walks you through just getting to know your system. Like, it's almost, I want you to imagine that like I'm right there holding your hand and we're just beginning to get to know the parts of you. and it's a slow, methodical walk through, just getting to know your system. So at the end of the 30 days or however long it takes you to do the book, you'll have a really good understanding and experience, not just understanding, head understanding, but good experience of who are your major players, who are your major drivers, like who are the parts that you drive in the bus, who are the parts that are in the back of the bus, and then what are the relationships between them, and who are the parts that respond to them, what's the family, who are all the cousins on the bus that have an opinion about them, and then what does it feel like to be in self, what's the experience of self like. And so it really just walks you through, like, kind of, there's a little section sort of teaching a little bit about IFS, but I really want it to be like a self-guided just experience of knowing your personality, who you are, what parts make you you, and then can you begin to have a relationship with those parts that make you who you are.
Wow. It sounds like it is IFS for dummies.
Yeah, exactly. For the rest of us. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. Okay,
IFS for dummies. I'm going to actually call it that. I'm going to call it
You
IFS
should.
for dummies because I love that. I love it.
That was the first thing I thought. I know you said you have to get back because your power issue and whatnot, but I think we got a lot in, and this was such a great interview. One thing I want to ask, and I always try and close with this, is that if you could give some advice to someone who's struggling with the idea of therapy or talking to someone about their big feelings or emotions, what would it be?
Excuse me. I love that question. I would say get to know the part of you who's afraid of therapy. There's a part of you who's afraid of therapy. There's a part of you who's afraid of big feelings. See if you can have a relationship with that part. What is that part afraid of? And let that part know that you're not trying to talk them into going to therapy, right? Like, 'cause then that's another part, right? So there's a part of you that's afraid of therapy and then a part trying to talk you into it. Those are two different parts. So I want to be open and curious and compassionate to the part of me who doesn't want to go. Okay, what are you afraid would happen if we did go? Tell me your fears. Tell me your concerns. Tell me what's hesitant. What are you hesitant about? And they'll say, right? Like, usually it's something like, I'm going to find out something that I don't want to know, something that happened in the past. I'm going to start crying and never stop. It's going to change. I'm not going to be able to function. Right? I'm going to go to therapy. I'm not going to be able to function. Like, it's going to change my life. We'll stick with the familiar. Like, I will stick with the safe and familiar because that's safe. And so we will stay. This is why we stay in relationships sometimes. We stay with safe and familiar instead of going out. So yeah, so let me be with them. I am right here with you, the part of me that wants to stay in the safe and familiar. Tell me more about that. So I would say just get to know those parts and then see where that goes. And it's okay. Of course you're scared. Of course a part of you is scared. That's okay. That's okay.
That was great advice. I feel like I'm about to start therapy and I'm already in therapy. But thank
Good.
you for that. Thank you so much. I think that anyone who has an opportunity to listen to this will benefit greatly from the way you share things, your knowledge, and what you do. So, Tammy, thank you so much for doing this with me and for your time and for even making it happen, even though there were things going on that parts of you felt, a little off about it. But I'm so glad.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's so nice to hang out with you. And I appreciate the opportunity. And I appreciate your grace and being so kind to me today with the power and the computer issue. And so I really appreciate it. My parts really appreciate that. Like I made it, there was a mistake and it was held in with grace. So that feels really good to my system.
Good. Well, again, I'm glad we were able to do it. So thank you so much.
Thanks.